Hello everybody, it is I, the Comics Kid 2099. As you can see, I am once again outdoors. I am filming this on the same day that I filmed the Missed Opportunities video that you saw a couple of days ago. So, yeah, that's why I'm still wearing the same shirt and I'm still in the exact same spot. So, as the title of this video suggests, I am doing another installment of Marvel Stole My Idea. If you didn't see the previous video that I did where I talked about Marvel stealing my idea, you should know that this is mostly done in jest. I don't actually believe that Marvel came to my house in the middle of the night, turned on my computer, looked at my secret files and said, "That's an idea that we should steal. Let's go back to headquarters before he wakes up." No, I don't really think that that happened. Basically, what I'm talking about here is that sometimes creative people have similar ideas. In the case of me, I'm an aspiring writer. I like to think that someday I will be doing my very own creator-owned comic books. And sometimes that means that ideas come to me that concern characters owned by a specific company. I might someday think, oh, that'd be a really good Superman story. And then I type it out and I save it, and maybe I'll never use it. Or maybe someday I'll take out the Superman part and I'll use it in some other entirely different way. That's kind of sort of what happened to me in this specific instance. Now, the last time I did one of these, it was specifically involving Marvel characters. This time, it was really more I was inspired by a Marvel comic book, as well as quite a few really broad, sweeping ideas that, if I plotted it out further, eventually would have been hammered out into actual stories. Now, even though quite a few of the ideas that I had come up with have been used by Marvel, I don't want to tell you the actual ideas or the crux of the series, because I like to think that someday I could still use this idea, I guess you will. So, I'm not going to tell you the title of this story that I came up with, nor am I going to tell you about any of the characters, because, well, it's something that I'd still like to put to use someday. So, for the purposes of this video, we'll just call my idea Comics Kid 2099's comic book. Okay, basically, as you may or may not be aware, I am a really huge fan of Chris Claremont's run on X-Men. This run lasted from 1975 all the way up to 1991, and then Claremont had a couple of shorter runs in the 2000s. Just the sheer volume of this series really impresses me. Even though I don't love every single story that happened in this 16-year period, I still really like it overall just because of how ambitious it is. But it's not just the length of this series that really impressed me. Claremont had some really astonishing ideas in his run, some of which definitely influenced me. First and foremost was probably Days of Future Past, which, if you haven't read it, is a story that starts some 30 years in the future, and then there's time travel involved that comes back to the present day, and then actions that take place in the present day then alter what would have been a really crappy future. But for the rest of Claremont's run, there's always that kind of sort of maybe that alternate future isn't as alternate as we'd like to think, and that maybe that future is still going to happen anyway. So you can maybe see where this is going. This is definitely an example of the Comics Kid 2099 was very heavily influenced by Chris Claremont's run on X-Men, and then I created some stories that were definitely different, but you could also draw a line and say, yeah, I can see what he's doing. This is kind of his own version of the X-Men. And I don't deny it. It is kind of sort of my own version of the X-Men. Although I did try very hard to make it its own unique thing, you could definitely see the influence there if you were to sit down and look at Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men, and then look at my Word document where I had all of this typed out. One of the ideas that Chris Claremont used was around the time when X-Factor was already a series. X-Factor, you may remember, was the original 5 X-Men who were no longer part of the core X-Men team. They formed their own team. And when they first started, basically they were pretending to be human beings who hunted down mutants. In reality, they were finding these mutants and they were training them to use their powers in a safer manner and then inject them back into society where they would be safe. However, there was a big problem because they were acting like humans who hunted mutants. Okay, sorry, it started raining outside, so the remainder of this video will be filmed inside. Sorry about that, it was a very nice day outside. So anyway, as I was saying, basically you had X-Factor, the original X-Men, pretending to be humans who hated mutants, and they were hunting down mutants. And this wasn't ever really their intention, but they were pretty much spreading anti-mutant bigotry by their very presence. So eventually they were like, yeah, we should probably stop that. And during all this time where they were pretending to be humans who hunted down mutants, the X-Men, at least a couple of them, they saw these big posters for X-Factor, and they were like, wow, Charles Xavier's original students, they're hunting down mutants. The dream has certainly fallen far, hasn't it? And meanwhile, people in X-Factor, they see that Magneto, their former arch-nemesis, is now leading the X-Men, and they're like, wow, Charles Xavier's new team, being led by Magneto. The dream has certainly fallen far, hasn't it? Eventually, all of this kind of gets sorted out by the time you get to the Mutant Massacre and then later in the Inferno storyline. Everyone kind of hugs and makes up, and they realize that they were wrong about the other team. Now, my plan in Comics Kid 2099's comic book was that you would start off with a team of heroes, maybe 5 or 6 of them, and then 2 or 3 of them would get separated from the rest of the group, and there would be some reason, I don't know why, where they would not be able to return to the rest of the group. And then I had this idea that maybe these 2 or 3 who have been separated from the rest of the group, they are put into a sort of containment camp with many other people with superpowers. Now, if you've been reading the Ultimate Comics X-Men stories after Ultimatum, there is in fact a camp where mutants are contained. I know from the first volume written by Nick Spencer that I've read that Storm and Colossus are both kept in one of these camps. Maybe not together, maybe in separate camps. This was something that I had planned out very, very far in advance, and I didn't really know how I was going to get there. I just knew that at some point I wanted to have a couple of the main members get put into this camp, and then eventually they would meet a couple of other new characters in this camp, and they would kind of form their own team. And then by the time they meet up with their former team members, who by this point have also added a few new people to their own team, they would kind of be like, yeah, where were you guys while we were imprisoned back there? Why didn't you ever come to rescue us? And it would kind of be sort of this, I don't really like my former teammates anymore thing. And so then you'd have 2 teams who really don't like or trust each other, and then this team that kind of spun out from the containment camp, they would be the darker, more Black Ops team because, well, they've had a harder life and they've had experiences that have turned them into this darker path, if you will. Also, this kind of seems like something that's been going on with the X-Men comics in the main 616 universe. You've got Cyclops and his Weapon X-Men, and then you've got the rest of the X-Men who really hate Cyclops because of something that he's done. And that's also something that's happened a little while after I had come up with a bunch of these ideas. Now granted, my idea of these 2 teams don't really like or trust each other was heavily influenced / maybe you could even say stolen from the kind of tension between X-Factor and the X-Men back in the 80s. So in a way, you could say that I was stealing an idea from Marvel, and then Marvel stole their own idea and kind of turned it up to 11. So yeah, that's kind of something that happened. And one of the final things that I wanted to do, I had, these 5 characters, and then I wanted to have a big, huge battle / war thing. This would be built up over the course of like 50 to 100 issues. It would be like a long time coming. And there would be this ginormous battle that very well might take place across multiple realities. I really love alternate realities. I really love time travel. So if I'm going to be doing a sprawling storyline that takes hundreds and hundreds of issues, of course I would try to include that in my story. Over the course of this giant battle, one of the original members of the team, who was there since the first issue, he would die because, I like to think that while killing characters just for the sake of killing them is really nonsensical, sometimes if you have a big, huge storyline, you need to make the stakes feel like they're actually important. And so if you kill a character, that makes people think that this was an important story and that things actually did happen that are worth noting. Now, I'm not saying that every story has to be important, but sometimes they do. And my big idea was, what if there's an alternate reality version of this guy who got killed, and instead of being this dark, hardened soldier type that our version was, he's actually a happy family man. He looks exactly the same, but certain events in his life transpired very differently, and so he's an entirely different person. Through one way or another, eventually, this happy version of the character who died, he would be transported to our reality, and then he would kind of replace the darker version of this character who died during the big epic battle. And then you'd have lots of tension between him and some of his predecessors' friends, because they would be like, I don't care who you are, I don't care what you look like, you are not my friend, I don't like that you're here, but you know, you're here. And maybe I should have said this at the beginning of the video, but this is a little bit of a spoiler for Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force. So if you haven't read it, well, sorry. At some point in an X-Men comic that I don't believe I have read, Nightcrawler actually died. Yes, the Nightcrawler, the fuzzy elf that we all know and love, he died. I'm not exactly sure when this happened, but it did. And anyway, in Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force, there is an alternate version of Nightcrawler who is now part of the team. Now, I'm not sure if you could say he's replacing Nightcrawler, since I don't think our Nightcrawler was ever part of the Uncanny X-Force team. However, this is kind of sort of the inverse of the idea that I had come up with, where a dark, hardened soldier character from our reality would be replaced by a more happier version of the same character from a parallel dimension. In this case, Kurt Wagner is from our reality, and he is the happy-go-lucky kind of character. And then he's replaced by this dark Nightcrawler who's from the Age of Apocalypse, and he's basically just really broody and not at all like our own version of Nightcrawler. Now, as I kind of said at the beginning of this video, all of my ideas, I still would love to try and find some way to put them forth in this series. That's why I haven't mentioned any of these character names. That's why I haven't mentioned any of the ideas that have not been used yet. It's just that these three ideas that I had, you know, superpowered people put in containment camps, and then two teams that split off from the same team and they don't really like each other, and then replacing a deceased character with an alternate version of himself. Those three things have kind of sort of already happened in comics by Marvel Comics. You had the containment camp thing in Ultimate Comics X-Men. You have the two teams who don't really like each other. That's kind of been a thing after Avengers vs. X-Men. And then you have Nightcrawler being replaced by Dark Nightcrawler. So yeah, some of the ideas that I came up with for this series, it would feel really weird for me to try and put them into place now, because it would definitely feel like I was copying the X-Men. Which is weird, because when I first started coming up with all of these ideas, I was definitely inspired by the X-Men, but at the time, none of these ideas had ever actually been done in the X-Men, although I guess you could make the argument that X-Factor not really trusting the X-Men and vice versa, that was kind of sort of already a thing back in the 80s. So yeah, maybe there is some way that I can put some of these ideas to use later on. I don't really know if there is or not. We'll see, you know? Right now, I haven't worked on that series in a very long time, because part of it was I was noticing that several of my ideas were being used by Marvel in their X-Men books, both Ultimate and 616. That is what Marvel stole from me, and I want to reiterate, I do not actually think they stole my idea. I think this is just another example of I came up with some very broad, basic ideas. In fact, a couple of them were kind of sort of already used long ago in the 1980s, and then Marvel just sort of recycled their own ideas. That's what I have here. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and if you did, I hope that you like, share, comment, and subscribe. Do all the things that you love to do on YouTube videos. Until then, I will see you guys next time with some other kind of video. Have a good day.